Jacksonville Jaguars fans, welcome in to Duval Daily, presented by GenJag.com. I'm Jordan DeLuga. Thanks so much for being here on Thursday, April 3rd. We are exactly 3 weeks away from the 2025 NFL Draft. Very exciting times. I know there's points throughout the offseason where it feels like the draft will never arrive, and I know this is going to be a long 3 weeks. It's going to be a lot of lying season. It's going to be a lot of misinformation season, but right now, I want to talk about, again, with exactly 3 weeks left, what are the Jaguars' non-negotiables for this NFL draft? The areas of the roster that they have to address based on the way that they've built the roster so far, right? And so we're going to dive into that today. I'm excited to get into it. I don't think any of these things should come as like a major surprise. And it's kind of a different way to just talk about the team needs. But to me, these are the non-negotiable areas of the roster that the Jaguars must address in this draft class. And if they don't, they're going to be pretty desperate to find some sort of stopgap option post-draft and free agency, or maybe even via trade. Who knows, right? But these are in order for me. These are in order. So we're going to roll through the list 1 through 5, the non-negotiable items, in my opinion, for the Jaguars. And my top item, it's not necessarily the position I think they need to attack first, in the first round. I wouldn't be against it, but wide receiver, and specifically wide receiver 2. You look at this roster, and I know if you've been paying attention, if you've been watching the show, I feel this way. Wide receiver 2 is very important for the Jaguars. Brian Thomas Jr. is going to be the focal point of the Jaguars offense. Point blank, period. Trevor Lawrence throwing the football to Brian Thomas Jr. behind the line of scrimmage, at the line of scrimmage, intermediate, deep, all that. That's going to be the focal point of this offense. Trevor Lawrence and Brian Thomas Jr. But you need a lot more than that, and you need someone to complement Brian Thomas Jr. I think Dyami Brown does that well. However, the Jaguars, for whatever reason, signed him to just a 1-year deal. He's only under contract through 2025, so if he plays the way you hope he plays, he's probably gone. So even if you feel like Dyami Brown can serve as that wide receiver 2, which I think a more realistic bet is for him to serve a wide receiver 3 role, you have to go get a wide receiver 2. Because look, Gabe Davis is not going to be on the roster following the 2025 season. Parker Washington, he's still under contract through 2026, but do you want to make the bet that he's going to be your wide receiver 2? No. Who else do you have? No one, right? No one. Yes, Elijah Cooks is still around. Yes, I'm a fan of his, but let's be real here. Same thing with Joshua Cephas, right? You've got to go get a wide receiver 2 to complement Brian Thomas Jr. for the long term and for the short term. I think that's very clear. Now, do you need to draft a wide receiver 2 with the 5th overall pick? Probably not. That's probably not the best way to go about it in terms of building the most complete draft class. I think that if you want to go second round, third round, there's going to be a lot of guys available. And one of the things I always talk about with the draft is you can't just draft for need. And this is a show where we're kind of talking about addressing needs. So how do you foil getting value and addressing needs? You have to find the right spots in the draft to take the needs that you have. And so even though wide receiver 2, in my opinion, is the top need, because you cannot just put it all on Brian Thomas Jr. and say, we're not giving you any help this year. And you need to give Trevor Lawrence more options, more good options, right? For this thing to really work. I think you look around the league, most good offenses have multiple, top 20, top 30 receivers in the league. I think Brian Thomas Jr. is clearly a top 10 receiver. I don't think the Jaguars have another top 30 receiver right now. So you got to go find one in this draft. And I think if you want to do that in the second round, you've got options like Jaden Higgins, Alec Io Manor, Jalen Noel, two teammates from Iowa State. They're Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel, two very different skill sets, but both guys with really reliable hands. Noel more of that burner, route runner, probably a move Z/slot. Then you look at Jaden Higgins, who's more of that prototype X, who can also be a power slot, and is a good route runner in his own right. Both of those guys have tremendous hands. I would be really fired up about either of them, but you keep looking. I mean, Kyle Williams, unbelievably underrated. We talk about him a lot here on the show. Torrey Horton. You can even look further down. Ty Felton probably fits in the De'Ami Brown type of role. I think that... Is he going to be a wide receiver too? Maybe not. But I think if you come away with one of your guys in the top 3 rounds at wide receiver, you're probably going to be okay. I think the Jaguars really need to do that. And even though I don't necessarily advocate for the Jaguars at this point taking a wide receiver at 5, I do still think making sure that you draft a wide receiver in the first 3 rounds is just about as important as anything for this football team. Now, the second one, I think, is pretty much just as important, but there's some more overall depth at the position on the roster. It's at outside cornerback. The reason I have it second compared to wide receiver 2 is just because if you're going to do anything in this new regime in year 1, it should be to get Trevor Lawrence going in the right direction, which I don't think in any way is he heading in the wrong direction right now. I just think it kind of stagnated a little bit last year. Offense was incredibly vanilla, stagnant. They weren't giving Trevor Lawrence a lot of easy buttons. They were kind of putting it all on him to make it work, and that just isn't the way you want to operate at the highest level in the NFL these days. So that's why I have wide receiver 2 ahead. You got to help Brian Thomas Jr. You got to help Trevor Lawrence out in this offense. And if there's one thing you want to accomplish in year 1, it's getting the offense going in the right direction. And wide receiver 2 is going to help you out in a big way in that regard. To me, outside cornerback is just as important on the defensive side of the ball. I love Jarian Jones. I really like Jordan Lewis a lot too. And Tyson Campbell is a very good starting corner, outside corner. He has had some injury issues. But if you're making the bet that either Jarian Jones or Jordan Lewis is going to start outside for you, I think that's a bet that might not go the way you think it will. That might not go as well as you hope. Maybe it could. But I just don't quite see it there. And then, you have Buster Brown. You have DeAndre Prince. Again, I just think this is a pretty big need. I really do. And I think the defensive backfield is a little bit of a weak link position or group. When you talk about if there's one guy that can't get the job done back there on the field, teams can exploit that over and over and over and over again. You've seen it time and time again in Jacksonville. And so, to me, you've got to make sure you have somebody there that can be a real outside corner. And then that gives you a lot of versatility to move Jordan Lewis and Jarian Jones around and potentially be able to utilize them in a big way. Talking about in, sets where you have a lot of defensive backs on the field, right? And Jordan Lewis can drop down into the box. Jarian Jones can do the same. So, I think both of them can be utilized potentially at safety as well. Different ways you can use these guys. And speaking of safety, I think that's the next biggest need because you need a starting safety. If Eric Murray is your top safety, that's just not a very good room. And no offense to Eric Murray, who had a pretty good year for the Texans, but you've got to get better. To me, I think that they could draft multiple safeties. But I think you got to draft at least one starting safety, probably in the top 3 rounds, if not top 4. I would love Andrew Makuba in the 3rd round. If you want to wait a little bit longer, Billy Bowman, I think that Kevin Winston's a decent swing coming off of the knee injury late day 2, potentially early day 3. We'll see where he ends up landing. I wouldn't be mad if you trade down and take Malachi Starks, even though the way I look at it, and we talked about this earlier in the week, if I'm going to trade down from 5, that means Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter are not available. I'm probably taking Will Johnson. I think I have him rated a little bit higher than Malachi Starks, and he plays a more valuable position. But let's say you trade down to 9 and Will Johnson's gone. Do I have any problem taking a Malachi Starks? No, I don't. And there's other safeties you can feel really good about in this class as well. And I just think you got to find a higher impact player back there. I think it's really going to help out the spine of your defense. I really do. And now we haven't talked about the defensive line, but I do think there's you've got to get some future starters in here on the interior of the defensive line and on the edge depth more so, and future starters on the interior. So the way I look at it, could the Jaguars come out of this draft and reasonably put together a quality defensive line without drafting anyone? I look at Josh Hines-Allen, Trayvon Walker, Mason Smith, Eric Armstead, Devon Hamilton. If you add a veteran edge to that group, could you potentially get the job done? Maybe. And so that's why it's a little bit lower on the list. And I think there's star power in that group with Josh Hines-Allen and Trayvon Walker. I think Mason Smith, I went back and watched the last 3 games of the season, studying Trayvon Walker yesterday. Mason Smith popped. That guy's got it, man. I think he's going to be an impact player. I really do. So, and the stats bear that out as well. Limited sample size, but I think Mason Smith is going to pop in year 2. I think he's going to have a good year, and that kind of mitigates the need on the interior of the defensive line. And so does Eric Armstead kicking inside, which he said he's going to do. I have every reason to believe that this is a smart regime and a regime that's going to say, hey, Eric Armstead, he's much better as an interior defensive lineman penetration style guy than he is as a edge 3. More valuable on the interior than he is as an edge 3. But that does bring us to edge depth as well. I think look, interior defensive line, I'm happy if you take Mason Graham at 5. I absolutely am. Even though I don't think it's the biggest need, I think it is a big need, and that's a major position of value. And Eric Armstead could potentially be gone after 2025. Devon Hamilton could potentially be gone after 2025. And then you're just sitting there with Mason Smith and his teammate from LSU, Jordan Jefferson, as the only guys that you've got, really. So, yeah, I think that interior defensive line is a need. I just don't think it's as pressing for 2025 necessarily as wide receiver or cornerback or safety. And I do think it's a value, a position that should be considered at 5, because I have Mason Graham, interior defensive lineman, as a top 5 prospect in this class. So yeah, I would be good with it. But you've also got a lot of options if you trade down, if you want to take somebody in the 2nd round. I think 3rd round is starting to push it, because I think I think there's going to be I think there's going to be double-digit interior defensive linemen taken in the first 2 rounds. And so if that many guys come off the board, that means your talent pool is greatly diminished when you get to round 3. So maybe you could wait till 70, but you've got to get an interior defensive lineman early just for the future of that position and to upgrade the ceiling in 2025. Having pass rush and waves, having a rotation on the defensive line is huge. Interior defensive line and edge. So when it comes to drafting an edge for the Jaguars, because you do have Josh Hines-Allen and Trayvon Walker, and I do think the Jaguars need to extend Trayvon Walker, and Liam Cohen talked about having open conversations about that. You don't need to draft a starter. You need to draft edge depth. And where do you get edge depth? To me, probably high-end edge depth in round 3. And if you just want to take a couple different swings at it, you could do round 3 and then a day 3 pick. I really don't know that you need to go edge in round 1 or 2. If the value presents itself and it's just a guy that you don't feel like you can pass up on, sure. And there's going to be guys like that potentially. Like if Donovan Ezraku falls to the Jaguars' second round pick, I'd have a hard time passing on that too. I would totally get it. Guys like that. If Abdul Carter falls to 5, it'd be hard for me to pass on that as well. And I broke it down to where you could reasonably, because of the timelines, you could have Josh Hines Allen into his 30s and then stop paying him elite money. You're starting to pay Trayvon Walker elite money, and then once Trayvon Walker is into his 30s, then you're having to pay Abdul Carter. The timeline makes sense a little bit to where you're not paying the premium for 3 guys at one time. You might be paying it for 2, which is a lot, but edge is one of the most valuable positions you can have. So I could see it. Again, I don't think Abdul Carter falls to 5. I don't think Travis Hunter falls to 5. So I do think either Mason Graham or a trade down is the most likely scenario, the probably most realistic scenario for Jags fans to get prepared for. Those are my non-negotiables. Wide receiver 2, outside corner, starting safety. And look, that doesn't have to be a free safety or a strong safety, or it can be any sort of safety that they feel can elevate this defense. And then edge depth and interior defensive line, future starter. That's how I see it. Let me know what y'all think in the comment section below. If you enjoy the content, please like and subscribe. Y'all have a good one.